doctor was working at a hospital where the patients were tagged with colored bands. Green, alive. Red, deceased. One night, the doctor was instructed to get a few supplies from the basement of the hospital, and so he headed to the lift. The lift doors opened and there was a patient inside, minding her own business. Patients were allowed to roam around the hospital to stretch, especially those who have stayed long. The rule was to be back in their rooms before 10. The doctor smiled at the patient before pressing the number for the basement. He found it unusual that the woman didn't have a button already pressed. He wondered if she was heading to the basement too. The lift finally reached the floor where the doors opened. In the distance, a man was limping towards the elevator, and in a panic, the doctor slammed the elevator button to close. It finally did, and the lift began to ascend back up, the doctor's heart pounding. "Why did you do that? He was trying to use the lift," the woman stated, annoyed. "Did you see his wrist?" the doctor asked. "It was red. He died last night. I would know because I did his surgery." The woman lifted her wrist. He saw red. She smiled. "Like this one?" John stood there, watching as his future father-in-law held his precious daughter's hand as he walked down the aisle. Tears in his eyes as the wedding march played in the background, reminding him that, in a matter of minutes, he would be witnessing John hold his daughter's hand and slip a ring on her finger. He reached the altar, and John finally held her hand, grinning from ear to ear. John said, "I'd never been this happy before." The bride's father then got down on his knees and started begging. "I did what you asked. Just please give my daughter back to me." John glared at him. He was ruining this beautiful moment. "Shut up. If you sit down and enjoy the wedding, maybe I'll tell you where I've hidden the rest of her body." I used to live alone in an apartment. Last night I was rushed out of the house by a friend to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. A few drinks later, I realized I had lost my phone. I checked everywhere, even in the restrooms. Nothing. I ended up using my friend's phone to call mine. The phone rang twice. Someone picked up, giggled with a low and raspy voice, and hung up. I tried again, but nobody responded anymore. In the end, I gave up and headed home. I found my phone on the nightstand right where I had left it. A girl named Emily lived in a small town. She often used to visit a market not far from her house, and used to look at the things there with great interest. One day she went to the market and saw a mirror there. She liked the mirror so much that she wanted to buy it at any cost. She somehow collected money and bought the mirror and brought it home. She was so happy that she sat in front of the mirror and looked at him all night. The next morning, when her mother asked him about the mirror, she said with fear, "Mom, there's something wrong with this mirror." When I smiled mirror, the girl in the mirror didn't smile back. A hiker decided to go on a hike by himself, something he was not very used to. The whole day was normal. Trees and bushes engulfed his surroundings. He enjoyed being outdoors in the mountains. Nothing seemed strange to him. That was until he was making his way back to his car. He figured an 8-hour hike was good enough. The sky was already getting dark and he needed to get back fast. What was odd was how much he didn't recognize the trail back. He began to panic. Night had already taken over, and all he had was a flashlight and no clue on how to get back. He knew it was already too late and too dangerous to keep going through the perilous forest. He began to worry that he would have no shelter for the night when, almost luckily enough, he stumbled across a broken-down cabin. It was dark and seemed like no one had visited it in years, but he knew it was the only place where he could rest until daylight, especially since his flashlight was running out of battery. He knocked on the door a few times, but no one answered, so he let himself in where, strangely enough, a perfect bed fitted for one person awaited him in the center. He knew that if the owner came back, he could explain himself. He was sure that the owner wouldn't mind, or was even probably dead. so he went ahead and got himself comfortable in bed. As he tried to sleep, he couldn't ignore the collection of paintings around the room, portraits of strange-looking people all peering at him, each wearing a smile that sent chills up his spine. Not too long after his exhaustion from the hike got the best of him, and he was able to ignore the faces. The next morning, he got up early and was shocked to see that there were no paintings around the room, but windows. A father went to say goodnight to his son, as it was routine since he knew his son would have trouble sleeping if he didn't. Whenever he went to his son told him that there is a monster under my bed, but when he looked down, there was no one there. But one day the room was dimly lit by the lamp, but the father could clearly see there was something unusual about the kid tonight. He looked the same, just with a huge grin that drew from ear to ear. "You okay, buddy?" he asked. The son nodded, still grinning, before saying, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." The father chuckled and got on his knees to take a look. There, under the bed, was his son. His real son, pale, trembling, and scared to death. He whispered, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." A daughter was in her room, busy with homework, when she heard her mother call her name. Dinner was ready. She jumped onto her feet and began making her way downstairs, when suddenly a pair of hands grabbed her and pulled her into the laundry room beside the staircase. She panicked before realizing it was her mother, unusually weepy with bloodshot eyes. "Don't go down there, honey. I heard it too." It was my routine every evening whenever my husband came home from work. He would have a tired look on his face and I would greet him warmly. And then we used to have dinner together. One day my husband returned home earlier than usual, but today his face was not tired. Today there was a strange gleam in his eyes. But I welcomed him warmly as usual and cooked for him. We were just sitting down to eat when there was a knock at the door. I opened the door to see a policeman who informs me that my husband died in a car crash. I turned my head to see my husband sitting at the table and eating the lunch I just served, grinning at me. A man just moved into an apartment and heads to the receptionist to get his keys. The receptionist gave him the key with a smile, but warns him not to disturb the door with no number on his floor. He wondered why, but didn't bother to ask. He was too busy with his new apartment to care. After he finished unpacking, he began to get curious. He questioned why the receptionist would warn him of such things, and so he stepped out of his apartment to check the door with no number. He tried the doorknob first, but it was locked, so instead he got onto his knees and peeked through the keyhole. The apartment he was looking into was empty. His eyes scanned the whole place before stopping at a woman, standing face against a wall in the corner. He noticed her pale skin and long black hair before stepping back, suddenly feeling perverted in a way for invading someone else's privacy. He brushed it off, assuming she was someone that did not want to be disturbed. The next day, he got more curious about the woman and eventually went back, straight away getting onto his knees. He peeked through the keyhole and saw all red. Red. He assumed that the pale woman must have caught him peeking the last time and covered the hole with something red. He left the door alone and instead went down to the receptionist to ask her questions. The receptionist sighed and asked, "You looked through the keyhole, didn't you?" He admitted to it, and so she felt obliged to tell him the story. She told him that a couple used to live in that apartment a long time ago, but the husband went crazy and killed his wife. However, this couple wasn't normal. They had pale skin, black hair, and red eyes.